we like to start on time here, so we'll go ahead and start as people come in. This event will be, of course, recorded for future posterity on the YouTube. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jeremy Craig, and I'm with a company called Testtakers in Singapore. I've been doing SAT prep here for over 20 years now. And with me is...
Yes. Hi, Jeremy. Welcome, parents and students and anybody listening to this on YouTube. I'm James Russell. I am a college counselor at Nist International School in Bangkok, Thailand.
Okay, great. And James obviously has the school announcements in the background that we get to hear. So let me switch so we can see the screen and we can go through what we're doing today. For those of you who've seen our talks in the past, this is a basic overview of what we think is going on in university admissions and also in testing in the world today. Now, this is going to be quick and a little bit dirty. Any questions on things, you can obviously contact us. Everyone should at least have my email address. It's info@testtakers. You send that. We'll try our best to get what the answer to your questions might be. I'm going to do an introduction of sorts, just a broad overview, and then talk a little bit market by market in terms of what's going on in the main destinations for foreign students traveling abroad, mainly, of course, with an eye of students from Asia, Southeast Asia specifically, who are looking to go overseas for universities. So hence, we're not going to talk about universities in Japan or Thailand or Singapore, although those are becoming more of an option as things develop. I'm going to talk a little bit about the SAT and updates on testing, what test optional really means, and then a little bit of recommendations kind of year on year about what your kids should be worried about moving forward. And this talk is mainly directed towards university counselor types like James and also families who are interested to know what to do for your kids without doing too much too early, is the common problem that we often see. So we'll begin our tour just with a little bit of Chinese aphorism. Moja shoto gualu. I've been saying this since COVID started. It means to cross the river by feeling for stones. Although now we know a little bit more now about where things are going to kind of end up, and things are becoming a new normal. But as it said, as the dust settles after all this madness, and there's more madness, of course, in the Ukraine and Europe, there's a lot of really, really bad information floating around, a lot of really bunk information, a lot of players in the markets in various locations preying on this lack of information, preying on uncertainty, selling big packages of, we'll help you get into this school, help you get into that school. Largely, most of those people are terrible, and we wouldn't recommend them to anyone. A lot of people might be hearing not what they want to hear from their university counselors at their schools and just looking for reassurances. But if your counselor says your kid's probably not going to get into schools X, Y, and Z, you know what? They're probably correct. The most competitive universities around the world, with some exceptions like in Australia, have just become much more competitive. And we'll talk about that, the why and the how and what for. But the best information is really your university guidance counselor or the schools themselves. A lot of times you want to see what's required to get into the school. These schools have admissions people who sit around their offices all day long responding to inquiries. And the information on the websites might not necessarily be current. So if you have specific questions about specific universities, don't ask some friend on a WhatsApp group or a chat group. Ask the university itself or ask your university guidance counselors who are, it's their job to keep on top of all this stuff, to read the 16 newsletters a day that we all receive and try to parse through the data. The big international events are starting up again this summer. IACAC and NAFSA just happened. There's some more regional events. There's going to be a lot of more kind of real-world interaction between both sides of the market, if you would, between the admissions officers on one side and the university guidance counselors on the other side. A lot more interaction just to dispel all these myths and get everyone back up to speed about what the new situation is. So that's just my broad preamble. Anything to add there, James?
Yeah, absolutely. As Jeremy said, things are starting to open up now in regards to in-person live events. Particularly, we've got in Bangkok, there are universities starting to roll through in the fall. But some of the best is, as Jeremy mentioned, your son or daughter's guidance counselor is going to be the best person to talk to. We're the ones that are in direct contacts with the universities. We can get students connected with Other students who are at those schools, maybe looking for similar programs, who have same contexts as your sons and daughters. So we are really a great source of information. And as Jeremy said as well, like, we're going to be honest with you about chances of success, and we want your sons and daughters to be successful wherever they go, and that means, you know, looking at what your plan is for your son and daughter, what their goals and ambitions are over the course of their study and beyond.
Okay, great. Let me get back to the right. There we go. Okay, UK. This is not my bag. On to you, James. What's going on in England?
Yes, absolutely. So the UK, as we know, is slowly becoming the second most popular destination on the planet for international students. They have nearly 1 million international students in the UK. Consequently, because it's become more popular, it's starting to catch up to the US in terms of raw numbers. It is becoming harder to get into. Just doing this job for many, many years, if a student was applying with, we teach our program here at NIST International School is the IB program. If a student had 34, 35 points, they're applying to King's or UCL or, you know, one of those brand name schools, and they were going for business, I'd say, you know, 10 years ago, I would have said, no problem, go for it. Now those schools, the IB, it's been more difficult to get into those schools that we're all familiar with, that as parents and, you know, talking amongst each other and talking to cousins and relatives who've gone to those schools before, we now know the information, the post is changing in regards to admission for these schools, so it is getting more difficult, and it is a sheer numbers game, and certainly places like the Cambridges, the Oxbridge schools have, as Jeremy mentioned, the competitive schools have become more competitive. For example, at Cambridge, they did deferrals at the start of COVID in 2020, and consequently, because of that, there were half the spots available for anybody applying in 2020, 2021. And then 2022 has become, because of those deferred spots, it's becoming very, very difficult. In regards to testing, I've just some other, it also depends when you're applying, when you're thinking about your son or daughter applying to the UK, popular majors, right, such as computer science or business tend to be the ones where that there's the most number of applicants. So maybe something to consider if King's or UCL or one of those schools is a consideration for your son or daughter. Look at some other majors, less popular majors like media studies or something in the realm of liberal arts, which tend to be the entrances tend to be a bit more liberal in that regard. So
right.
Any other comments, Jeremy, about that? Or
just one thing you just spoke about other majors. Pre-COVID, I was at a talk that LSE gave here, and if you want to apply to London School of Economics and study economics, is really hard to get into. Yep. But if you say you want to study economics/philosophy, then it's much, much easier. So you can kind of squeeze in doing these little hybrid or dual degrees type things. But again, once you're there, you're stuck in that particular faculty. So you can't apply to media studies and switch over to business. Right. But if you really are dead set on a school, looking at the variance of the degree, in like a PPE or political science economics, the guy was quite candid and said, listen, those are much easier to get into. And frankly, the degree is 90% the same.
Yeah. And this goes, the same information is true for the US. Computer science tends to be one of those programs, like getting into a place like University of Washington or you know, in Chicago, if you're going to Illinois, you know, these are very Urbana-Champaign, these are very difficult select computer science programs where they take a very finite number of international students, you know, so in some cases 20 or less. So what our students have found, you know, in particular in the context of the US, is to do a minor, to major in a particular subject, but then pick as a minor area of concentration computer science. And, you know, over time you can, you know, prove success in that major, build, you know, network connections and move on from there. So in regards to the UK, as Jeremy mentioned, one of the key differences, however, is that there tends to be more rigidity because it's a 3-year program. You are kind of stuck with that major. So if you are going to go media studies, make sure your son or daughter, that's something they want to, you know, be interested in studying over the course of that time. So in regards to testing, SATs and other forms of testing, it can be a bolster if you have a strong SAT score for a competitive school in the UK. Any kind of credentials are very valuable when students, or international students in particular, are applying. having qualifications like actual external qualifications on your application, such as an MYP score or an IGCSE or AP, et cetera. It differentiates certain candidates from others. So if they're looking at equal students, if the students have similar scores or similar personal statements, but one student has an SAT score or an MYP score, which is impressive, that's going to make a significant difference in your son or daughter's application. So something to think about, given the nature of the competitiveness now of UK applications. Anything else that I think, some other trends.
No.
Yeah. All right, we'll move to the next.
Pretty much if you're going to get in or not, but that the apple cart's been upset, and those new numbers aren't really out yet in terms of what you need to get into those schools. Is that true, James? It's still kind of, things are being reshuffled?
Yeah, so what happens is exactly the reshuffling happens up to the end of August due to there is in July 6th, that's when the IB results, the final results are sent to the UK university. So they don't really know what their actual, they know, who they've admitted, but in terms of raw numbers being posted to specific schools, that's not going to be sorted out till the end of August. So it's a much later timeline that students have to deal with. And also, I think one of the other frustrating things that we found for some students too, because they're waiting on visas, et cetera, some of the schools have waited because of that, right? If you don't find out you're in a school until, say you're doing A levels, you don't find out, you're in until August, then you've got to sort of hustle, get your student visa done, and then, make sure that's done in a timely manner. And we know that lineups for international student visas with COVID and everything happening isn't the easiest. Although I will say the UK is probably one of the better organized in terms of the visas and expeditiousness of that. So, there was a lot of waiting for top schools this year in regards to Imperial, UCL, and some of the bigger name schools.
Yeah, and just to put a bow on it, I think we get into this with Europe as well, but when you're choosing your IB subjects, so when you're going into IB1, it's important you kind of cast a glance further ahead. And if you're looking to apply to LSE and do economics, you really need to have HL math in IA or what was it, IA now?
Yeah, now in terms of economics, right, any of the HL maths will be acceptable in that regard. The AA is the one that is considered to be the more rigorous. However, they will accept AI as well.
Looking to you have to choose going into 11th grade that you need to do this super advanced math class. And I know that the IB does a relatively poor job in educating British schools. It's saying if you get a 7 on standard level, that's still okay. But they have this sort of stringent requirement that is just sort of equating that with an A level. But we're not going to change that. So, okay, on we go. We got to keep our whirlwind pace here.
That's right.
Okay, here we go. Europe. All right.
Europe. Okay, so what we've seen, we're the context of our school is we are a UN affiliated school, so we have many families who are embassy families, and we consequently have a diverse mix of students here. We've got US, Canadian, UK, students from all over Europe, Asia, et cetera. So in that regard, we do the EU and European, because families are European. They have European passports, they get the benefit of either free tuition or they pay very little if they're going to go. If they've got a European passport, then they're entitled to tuition of less than 2,000 euros a year, which is quite favorable. Even for international students, it's become the costs. What we're finding is that relative to places like the United States, even Singapore, even Canada, the costs for studying in Europe, because it's a shorter degree and the tuition tends to be under 12 to 13,000 euros a year, it is becoming a more popular option for students and family to consider. Also, because a family, even if the family is not European, there tends to be there's connections globally in Europe where family members are, or where those bridges are met. So families are very familiar with the context of Europe. The Netherlands has been really, in terms of the where students are going in Europe, it's been the most popular option. When I started here 5 years ago at NIST International School, I previously worked in Saudi Arabia. I didn't have a single applicant apply to the Netherlands in terms of a destination. This year, it's the third most popular place at our school where students end up going to, whether they be from Europe, whether they be from an international family. The reason being the quality of the education there, the English language instruction, the transferability of the degree as well, that the degree you can use credits toward, if you want to do a master's in the US or UK or transfer to another European school, it's relatively straightforward. However, the secret is out, or has been out for a long time about the Netherlands. And what we're seeing is this year was their year of the overwhelming for the Netherlands. So what's had to happen is next year, it's going to be increasingly more difficult for students to, before, if a student had a decent IB score, if they had like 28 to 34 points, and they wanted to go into international relations, that would be no problem. You've got your pick of the schools to go to in the Netherlands, but consequently, just to the competitive nature, it's going to become next year a much more difficult endeavor for students to be admitted. The cost is very low for international students. It's under $10,000 a year. You can finish a 3-year degree for $30,000 US dollars, which is unheard of, right, for a tuition anywhere in the US. And it's a degree that you can use as a bachelor's if you wanted to study, go a master's later on in the United States or Canada or Europe for much less cost. And it's also a very, very strong programs. The big caveat about the Dutch schools is they are excellent schools. However, it's relatively easy to get in, but staying there can be a challenge for some students because of the academic rigor and keeping up with the you're really doing a 4-year university degree in 3 years. And, in terms of the expectations, right, are very strong at those universities to do well. So if you don't do well after your first year, then, you'll have the talk with your academic tutor and be asked to, perhaps if you're not performing to the expectations, be asked to leave in that regard. HL Math is becoming a must for, as we mentioned with the UK as well, for business, computer science, because of the change of the IB course curriculum. Anything business or science related, if you're applying to Europe, whether it be the Netherlands or anywhere else, you should have HL Math. Once again, your best sorts of information is your son or daughter's college counselor, or go directly to the website of the school and see what the requirements are. Because the other destination I put on there too, Ireland, has also for EU families become a popular option. It's an English-speaking country, so it's also a popular option because of the opportunities to work there as well. In a place like Dublin, it's the headquarters for Google and all the big, multinational companies. So you getting work experience there in a cosmopolitan city like that, in an English-speaking countries, an excellent option for many international and for EU families. Italy, Spain, and Belgium, these are traditionally, these are very niche programs, such in Italy. Bocconi is an excellent business type school, and they've got excellent art institutions. Spain, once again, they have, they've got an excellent, at IE is an excellent business school, and Belgium has some fine arts institutions, as well as a couple, liberal arts type schools. But they are less in terms of the big, if you're looking at options for international families, where your sons and daughters are going to find the most students that are international students who've been at private international schools, you're going to find them in the Netherlands. All right, next slide. Moving on to, Australia. Okay, so yeah, I was scouting through some articles the other day and looking at what the prognosis is on Australia. Now, Jeremy and I have talked extensively about the how difficult a situation Australia is in financially. They were losing billions, per year based on the cohort of students. It's outstanding schools in Australia. You look at the University of Melbourne and Sydney; they're in the top 100. For many categories of institutions. But because it's been so difficult for students to get, even now, students are simply, it's prohibitively expensive for many of them to fly to Australia and actually do classes in person. They've only managed to get, that article highlights, I think 47,000 international students from a former number of nearly 300,000 are actually back. So that's just a loss of revenue for the country as a whole when you don't have students there. So they are trying to, they don't anticipate that numbers will return to normal in the next 2 to 3 years, but they are taking active measures to incentivize students coming to Australia. So there are, and consequently, to incentivize means either scholarship opportunities or lower entry requirements for some programs for students to go. So Australia really needs, they were dependent for many years on international students, and now they're really having to play, because of COVID, play a little bit of catch up in that regard.
Well, and then I'm sure we all heard that Australia decided to change government, and the new, although they're not called Liberals, but the new Labor government will be more supportive. They've said they'll be more supportive of higher ed, because it's recognized not just as a, as a boon to the Australians getting education, but it's an entire industry in Australia. It's just huge. So they need those foreign students to come back, and they'll be kind of fast tracking things to make sure they get back up to where they were. Because they kind of went, the universities there went all in on foreign, and they kind of, when the tide went out, everyone looked around and said, uh-oh, and there were big cuts. So they'll be coming back strong, though. The Aussies are on top of things. They have offices all over the place just marketing themselves, and they'll come back to where they were.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll take a couple of years, but yeah, once the students start to come back, and they have an excellent global reputation for education. So in regards to testing, you do not need the SATs if a student is doing a strong curriculum, if they've got the IB diploma, or however, if they are doing an American high school diploma with AP courses, they will have to show an SAT test. So that'll be a big, that's really their gold standard for admission for a student working on an American diploma with an AP curriculum. For students who are Australian nationals, if they're not doing the full IB, they'll have to take something called the Australian National Test. All right, next slide.
Yep. All right, here we go. America. Okay.
Okay, America. Yeah. I'm gonna let Jeremy. I'll jump in, but he's gonna talk about some of the trends here.
Much ink has been spilled, and much more ink will be spilled in the next coming years about the impact of COVID on American applications. Broadly speaking, there was a flight to quality, whereas more and more people only applied speculatively to the most competitive schools. Similarly, as a result of COVID, the SAT became optional at pretty much every school in America, simply because schools can't require a test that you can't take. That's just sort of logical, right? So all of a sudden, the SATs used to be a barrier to applications. And you would take a look, you go in and see your guidance counselor, and they say, oh, well, my son/daughter is so smart and they want to apply to Harvard. And they would show the little readout that says, Harvard, average SAT score is this, and you're way down there. Maybe not. Maybe I want to apply to Harvard then. Now with SATs out of the game, people would say, oh, well, we're just going to go ahead and apply to Harvard anyway. And Harvard, of course, isn't going to say, please don't apply, because they want your money and they want your application numbers. And then all the schools are doing it. So all the number of applications at the most competitive schools have gone up by 30 to 50% in the last couple of years. The number of Americans has not gone up. The number of international applications probably has been a little bit up. That spike has been more and more people applying to more schools, applying to 7, 10, 15 different schools, speculatively, thinking that they're just going to have a punt and apply to Stanford and Berkeley, because you never know, right? You might get lucky that day. So as a result, the application numbers, the percent admitted, have never been lower at the top echelon of American schools. I hate those echelons, rankings and stuff, but that's just the way it is. So whereas previously single digits was kind of like, wow, 7 or 8% acceptance rate, now you're looking at 3 or 4% for the most competitive schools. And some of them like MIT, Caltech, you're looking at maybe numbers smaller than that. That said, if you're an international student, that number is probably half of what the other number is. I've done some figuring, and the international acceptance rate for UCLA is probably about 3.4%. Their overall acceptance rate is 12%. Berkeley's 4.1. The overall acceptance rate at Berkeley is 11%. If you're overseas, you become in that category, not necessarily going to get in. because of that. They have, they have X number of foreign seats per year, and that's it. In Canada, that James will talk about just a little bit, the schools are expanding. University of British Columbia says, we're a great brand, we're going to build more buildings. In America, they say, no, we're not going to expand. And there's been some Malcolm Gladwell-esque type talk about why they won't do this. And the schools will say, oh, well, we don't have facilities, we don't do this, which is really a lot of hogwash. The schools want to maintain their exclusiveness for their alumni. And by increasing your undergraduate by 50%, which someplace like Cornell could do relatively quickly, is not something they're worried about diluting their brand. But that's a whole different discussion. We won't even go there. Now, the net effect of all this is that it's become much, much more difficult to get into brand name universities. You talk about your Ivy League and all those is one thing. You're talking about Vanderbilt, which is a great school. Vanderbilt, 7-8% admit rate now, used to be 17%. So the schools that used to historically be kind of like your safeties, maybe your backups for the most competitive schools, now those are as competitive as Dartmouth was 5 years ago. And there's been a cycling all the way down. But like I've been saying for 20 years, a rising tide lifts all the boats. And there are great schools out there that you've never heard of, that I haven't heard of, James haven't even heard of, that would be perfect for your kid. It's just a question of finding them and doing the research and not going along with everybody else. We get into school search and stuff, that's not really our ambit here, but that's just broadly speaking, American schools, really hard to get in. The numbers you see are true. I did a big thing on, it's be up on my website, so I looked at all the numbers, and it really has become a little bit bonkers. And particularly if you're an international student, you're looking at that headline admit rate, your admit rate is probably half of that. And that's just the way it is. So broaden your perspective and look at schools that are outside your arbitrary top 25, top 50. That's my big rant. Anything to add there, James?
Yeah, as Jeremy said, right, the bar has been changing, right? When I started this job 12 years ago doing college counseling, Northeastern University, great school, it had a 35% admit rate. This year, a whopping 8% admit rate. So even the schools that are not the Ivy League are the ones that are changing the post. Places like NYU as well. It's parents and students have heard of it. They maybe have a family member who's done, study there or something. So, I'm going to apply too. But even a place like NYU is still looking now. The post is changing at if you want to go to Stern's Business School. I mean, even this year, if you've got a perfect IB score, that's not a guaranteed admission cycle at all. There's just, as Jeremy said, there's a finite number of places at these for international students at these very exclusive programs specifically. And it's just it's important for families to be to once again talking to not always talking to it's great to have family member conversations, but you need to get the most current information, and what was true 30 years ago is not true today. So getting the most up-to-date information is critical, and that's what why your son and daughter has a guidance counselor that they can talk to at their school to get the most up-to-date information, or talking to the school directly, because they'll give you a very honest answer as well if you if you see them at a face-to-face conference, or you have a realistic conversation with them. Because they want you to be happy. They don't want you to waste your money, because it takes them time to read through applications. And, in the scheme of things, they really want students who are going to be successful at those institutions to apply. And I'm just trying to think anything else with US trends. So the Ivies, there's I mean, we could have a whole webinar based on this topic, look at data by data scraping, but just be aware that things have changed considerably. The impact of COVID is measurable in terms of making it more difficult to get into the schools that traditionally were okay a few years ago, are becoming almost impossible.
Yeah, it isn't that they don't want you, it's just they have X number of seats. And everyone wants Springsteen tickets, but everyone can't go. So and they're not going to increase the size of the theater. So look at other bands. Basically, it's not the best analogy, but let me move on to testing. Again, COVID happened, couldn't take the SAT test option. Now, most schools in America are still test optional. They're continuing it because if a big school goes requiring the test again, then their number of applications is going to go down. And if your number of applications goes down, then your rankings go down, and probably someone in admissions might lose their job. That may be a little bit extreme. But the only schools have gone back to not embracing it. MIT came back and said, we required the test. They don't care about reading, writing. They just want to verify the math. Florida also required the test, particularly a lot of the southern schools require it for scholarship purposes, which is a great thing. The sad fact is that in America, particularly at the most expensive high schools, this happens in international schools as well, something like 35% of kids have a perfect GPA. So they have an A average. If America was on the IB system and everyone had a very, a good metric that you compare apples to apples across different states and different schools, then SAT frankly would have less utility. But America, all the high schools are a little bit different. So the universities have to say, okay, you have a 4.1 GPA. What is that relative to your school? What is that relative to the kids from your school who have come to our university over the last 10 years? What's that relative to the classes that you're taking? They have to do that almost student by student, school by school. The SAT provided them with a impartial metric that they could just say, okay, here's the standard candle. Here's where you are on this academic proficiency test. You take that out, and then it's a little bit more guesswork. And what they're finding is that kids that submit SAT scores have a better chance of getting in. And I'll get that into that a little bit later. But of course, then you call selection bias, because the kids who are really strong academically, of course, they're going to do well in the SAT. And then they're going to apply and do well getting into universities. I've been doing this for almost 30 years. I still haven't met the kid who is brilliant, Harvard, Ivy League, brilliant, and flunks the SAT. Those kids fall out of bed and score a 15-10. I've met hundreds of those kids. I've never met a kid who is absolutely super brilliant and doesn't do well in the SAT. I've met kids who are super brilliant who don't do well in the math, and that's a different thing. Okay, and so there's ways around that, obviously. But a lot of people say, oh, my kid just doesn't test well. I hate to say, your kid probably isn't as strong academically as you think they are, because the SAT and ACT are meant to measure how well you will perform at the college level academically. Now, in terms of other tests to take, TOEFL, IELTS, Duolingo, if you can take them, go ahead and do it. Duolingo, you can take it home, right? And that will just add another feather in your cap, particularly if you have a passport that's not immediately identifiable as English language, even if you're doing IB in English, which most listeners here would do. Credit advanced standing is something that depends on the school. If you get a 7 on IB HL physics and you go to University of Oregon, they'll probably give you a year exemption. If you go to Harvard, you get a firm handshake and say, good job, now take the class again. It depends on the school. But really, those AP testing and APs and A levels and stuff, that doesn't come into the fray for getting into the school. That's more once you get there, what exemptions can you get towards graduation? A lot of people think you need X number of APs to get in. Honestly, what I've heard from admissions officers, particularly in the States, they don't really look at your AP scores, they look at your grades. Maybe APs have gotten more important. Maybe you take once you take in junior year, if you're not doing SATs, because of course a 5 on an AP is a 5 on an AP no matter where you are in the States. Whereas a 4.0 in your high school is a more wishy-washy metric than a standardized test might be. So I'm James. Have you heard anything about the APs becoming more important?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously this is, as Jeremy said, right? If you're doing some AP classes, and these are classes that you generally want to do, say like an AB calculus or something like that, and that's something you want to do as an extra just to get better. It's the rationale of doing it, right? Why are you doing it? Why are you taking the subject? Are you trying to bolster, are you just taking 1,000 APs just for the sake of getting into the school? But if it's genuine, it's about genuine curiosity and interest. So if a student really wants to bring their math to the next level, they're going to they might do their AB calculus over the summer, or in their sophomore year to get ready for HL math, right? In year 12. But universities can see through the veneer of the student who has like all these AP, 20 different tests that they've been doing for, I don't know, the last 2 or 3 years, right? Trying to differentiate themselves. It's about authenticity. It's about doing it for the right reasons. And it's about matching it to what you want to study at school and the reason why you're doing it, not just for the sake of taking tests for the sake of taking tests.
Yeah, and the trend at the American school here is to limit the number of APs that people can do, and there's been a backlash against that. But you're getting kids taking 17, 18 APs, and then they're spending their high school studying for APs instead of growing as an individual. But how do you put a number on that? But that's a whole more philosophical wormhole. Okay, back to you, James. Talk about our neighbors up north.
Yeah, so popular schools for our the context of our school at NIST are I think this is probably true for many of the big international schools in Southeast Asia. The McGill, the U Toronto, the UBC, the schools that parents and students have heard of tend to be the most popular. Once again, the applications have very popular destination, I would say. So the top destination in our school is the US, followed by the UK, followed by the Netherlands, and then Canada comes behind that. But it is a popular option. And in Canada, as Jeremy mentioned, there aren't the finite limits that you find with some of the elite, Ivy League type schools that will only admit 200 students a year for a place like Harvard University. Canada doesn't have those necessary caps. However, once again, as I mentioned before, popular programs like computer science or business are considered elite programs in Canada. So the entry requirements tend to be significantly higher. However, I mean, when you look at the global rankings, those three schools fit in. I know Jeremy could, talk about QS global rankings and knock them off their post, but that's one thing that parents and students tend to look at when they're looking at school, starting with the QS. How's the school ranked? And you look at places like Toronto and McGill that are 26 and 27 ahead of half the Ivy League schools in the United States. So, I mean, that's just according to the arbitrary graduate level research of the QS rankings. But they are becoming popular for students and international families because Canada is very lenient. I'm Canadian, full disclosure. So in terms of immigration policies, we, as a country, Canada is looking to bring 1 million new immigrants in the next year or so to Canada. So there's an active campaign by universities and by the Canadian government to bring more qualified individuals to the country to help the economy overall. We simply don't have enough people. So versus the US, which in many cases, right, like the elite schools are putting sort of a full stop on that. Canada on the other and the other realm is doesn't have the same cap spaces on many of the programs that are there. So another thing that's been beneficial too is if you're an international student going to Canada, you can qualify for permanent residency just by being a university student. So if you go to a 4-year program in Canada, you've already qualified for 4 years becoming a permanent resident. After you also get 2 years of an extension after you're done your studies to find a job in Canada, which is pretty. Either you continue doing a master's study or you continue looking for a job. There are many opportunities, particularly in the realms of business and computer science, to find employment. So the process of becoming a permanent resident and then an eventual Canadian passport holder for international families is another appeal why Canada has become a top destination for students. The other thing too, you can actually work when you're in Canada and get paid for it. Places like the University of Waterloo and University of Toronto have these co-op programs. Now, the word co-op is when somebody from the US, somebody thinks of a co-op as maybe a thrift store or something like that, but a co-op is actually a work experience program. So at the University of Waterloo, students will they'll do a semester of theoretical computer science work, and then the second semester they'll actually be paid to work at a place like Google or another private company or enterprise. So there's some financial incentives definitely for families and students to consider Canada. It can bring the cost of tuition and help to build the student resume if they're looking for future employment or to live there. In regards to the SAT scores and what that means for Canada, typically if you're doing a full diploma or you've got a strong level of AP classes, you typically don't need the SAT. However, for competitive programs such as you're looking at the computer science or business programs, if you've got a strong SAT score, then send it, because it can be a difference maker for those top tier types of institutions. So it is something that, as like the UK, will consider as part of the credentials for academic credentials for an application. So anything else for Canada, Jeremy, or anything else
I
to
mean,
add there?
it's always been an awesome option. And I just to encourage everyone to have a look at Canadian universities, and they've really upped their game internationally. We had Trump and then COVID and stuff, and Canada's always, maybe because being smaller, able to pivot more quickly, and certainly much more more open towards immigration than America has historically been the last 10 years or so. So it's always a great option.
And there's a small number of Canada's a socialist country, so the education system is standardized. So no matter what university you go to, there's a certain quality of education at any of the schools, transferability, et cetera. So there are other universities in Canada to consider beside the big three, the McGill, Toronto, or UBC.
It's a flatter landscape than America. You have these peaks and valleys. In Canada, they're all rock solid.
Yeah. And they're challenging. It's a challenging university degrees, but once again, if you are an international family and your 10-year plan is to, your son or daughter to become a permanent resident or to live there, it's much, much easier a process to do in Canada than it is in the United States.
Yep. Okay, let's move along. Yeah, I'm just going to storm through the SAT stuff relatively quick, because this is all water under the bridge I've done many times. Again, it came out a fitness test sort of for people going in the military. You did well, you didn't get shot. You didn't do well, you got shot. Now it's taken by too many people around the world. Test optional will continue. This is the new normal. This will continue for the next 3 or 4 cycles anyway. Universities are looking to get data on the kids that they accepted without SATs, and then track those kids through their university life to see how they do academically relative to kids who did submit SAT scores. And that process takes 3 or 4 years, or even maybe 4 or 5 years for kids to go through the entire 4-year program until they kind of reassess. But again, like I alluded to earlier, for people to not accept SAT scores now, it's a little bit of a brave move. The upcoming dates are August, October, December. Next year, in theory, next March will be the new administration of a digital SAT, which will be a test that you take on your own device at your own school on a specific time and date. We'll talk much more about this later as we get more information. I could talk about this for a while. A lot of it is kind of idle speculation of what we think it might look like. So hopefully by end of the summer months, August or so, we think we might see at least a sample test, and we'll have much more feedback on that and how to prepare for it. It might be that in the short term for next year, you look at the ACT instead, because that's something that we know for what it's worth. SAT scores at selected schools. This is pre-COVID. These are probably gone up a bit. But you see 1,100 rock solid schools. UC Merced is probably now 1,350, because it's a UC. 1,300, you got your rock solid big land grant schools. University of Georgia, I know, is much more competitive now. And 1,500 median, that, you have a 1,500 applying to USC. Everyone else has a 1,500 applying to USC. So what? You call Rick Singer. You need something else on your list for those schools. And those are the uber competitive. Again, like I spoke about earlier, test blind. Some schools, University of California, have gone test blind. They can't even look at SAT scores right now. Other metrics will become much more important, but how do you measure those metrics when everyone has an A average? And when your parents will camp out in front of your chemistry teacher's classroom to make sure that you got an A instead of an A- on that quiz, because that might bring you down a little bit. There's a great article in the Atlantic last year about the prep school in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., where the university guidance team just left because the parents were getting so uber competitive about everything. So what are they looking at? Other things. But again, make sure your kid's happy. Make sure your kid tries hard. Make sure your kid learns how to fail. Learning how to lose properly is a key life skill that I frankly see a lot of kids don't have, because they win at everything. And life, you don't win all the time. If your SAT score, everyone should have a look, at least take a practice test. If your SAT score is stronger than what you know to be the historical average SAT score at that school, go ahead and submit. If your score is lower, then maybe you should not submit. If you're not sure, talk to university guidance counselor. That's the basic gist. So certain schools require it or don't, they can't come out and say they require it, but certainly it does make a little bit of a difference. Now, other changes, essay, subject tests, these are done last year, done. Test availability is no longer as much of an issue in Southeast Asia. They've actually come out here and added some new test centers. Test is now registerable for the rest of this year. So you can register for the December test this afternoon if you want to. Universities need students. And unless you're looking at that upper 5%, those universities, a lot of them are not doing that well for students. So look at schools that are a little bit down the list. I always like to say, look at the map of America. It's huge. For Canada, look at the map of Canada. It's huge. You want to go to school in Saskatchewan, or you want to go to school in Toronto? Very, very different, right? So similar for America, you want to look at what locations do you want to live. If you want to just do a plain vanilla major, economics, psychology, something like that, where do you want to live? Then look at schools there. Only if you're doing something super specialized. Marine biology, yeah, you need to be at University of California, San Diego, not at Nebraska. You don't go to Harvard to do marine biology, right? Things like that. So the niche programs, yeah, you have to look a little bit, but for other things, one piece of advice I find is quite good. If you're really interested in something and you're reading books about it, who wrote the book? Look on the back, look them up. Where did that person go to school? Where did that person teach? Are they a teacher now? Where do they do their master's degree? Where do they do the undergraduate degree? And that's a great way to pick out schools that are strong in particular niche areas that are interest to you. Now, most 17-year-olds don't have a clue, but that's one thing you can have a look at. A lot of these changes are still developing. ACT is broadly available, and they're probably going to enjoy a little bit of a bump internationally as people kind of stand back and let this new SAT happen next year. And we'll be talking much more about that. James and I will probably do another session at the end of the summer, but we'll have some more data on that. Let's go here. Here we go. Okay, and use of SAT scores. This is just some quick and dirty numbers from before. You see the admit rate without scores, admit rate with scores. But again, students that do really well in the SAT are going to be really good students or have a better chance of getting it. So it's a bit, you can't draw too much from these numbers, but they are kind of interesting. The one thing we neglected to mention on America, if you're sure you want to go to a school and you definitely want to go there, apply early. Your chances of applying early decision, early action are much, much greater than if you don't. And a lot of these schools, because of particular early decision, you're effectively filling your seats early with confirmed students. That increases the school's yield percentage, which is part of the equation that gets you a ranking. So some of these schools, again, some numbers, James, after you've seen these, like 50 or 60% of the seats are being filled up by early decision students, right?
Absolutely, and as Jeremy mentioned, it makes such a significant difference for a university. It's the idea of demonstrated interest, right? Like the student who makes a decision early on in the process and is committing to this university, maybe has it's not some candidate, some student who just suddenly applies. This is a student who's been on webinars, who's been in touch with maybe somebody on a line at that particular institution, knows the school, right? Has either, if possible, has been to the campus and knows the culture of the school. But for those elite schools, as Jeremy mentioned, it is critical to if the Ivy League dreams are there, do the early decision or early action, because the admission rates are just very, very much more in your favor.
Yeah, the schools will like to tell you that it's because you have a demonstrated interest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm a bit more cynical, and I think they just want to get a confirmed bum in a seat, and because that helps their numbers. It helps their metrics for when they have their performance appraisal at the end of their contract. Anyway, me bitter, yes. When to test? Digital test coming. Our general advice is if you're your class of 2024, you should probably look to take the test in October or December of this year. Normally we tell kids to hold off a bit, but we don't want you taking the test in March or May, because that's going to be the new thing. And you don't want to be the new guinea pig. If you go ACT instead, that's another option as well. Your test scores will broadly increase over time. They aren't things that you don't need anywhere else. It's reading, writing, and mathematics on both the SAT and ACT. And presumably, if you're going to high school and paying attention, that will get better over time. But a lot of kids in Singapore wait, and then they take the test when they're serving their national service. And when they're in the Army, their reading, writing, and mathematical skills do not go up; they go down. So, and also schools, universities like to see a test that you take when you're 17 or 18, not a test when you take when you're 19 or 20. So knocking out these standardized tests when you're still in school is preferable to waiting if you're in the Army. It's obviously if you're in Taiwan, Korea, or Singapore, you've got NS commitments to worry about. You can take the test multiple times. Taking more than 2 or 3 times is bonkers. You're going to keep getting the same score again and again and again. In terms of planning things out, et cetera, talk to your university guidance counselor. They'll give you some great advice. If you want to contact me, I'll give you some advice. My first question is always, what year are you? Where are you applying to schools? And what math are you doing? Particularly SAT math is not that easy, but it's not that hard. It's not that easy. And taking a little bit more of the IB math is certainly encouraged. I happen to know that there are chunks of the SAT math that aren't covered until well into year 1 of the IB math. But you can identify what those areas are and work on them over the summer on Khan if you are that kind of student, and not everyone is. So that's the broad advice about when to test. How to test, how to prep early, read a lot. Keep up in math class, read a lot. TikTok, James and I were lamenting this the other day about people it's the new opiate of our masses and just people looking at videos, reading articles from, National Geographic, Economist, anything with pictures is fine, just with words. I used to say not too many pictures. Now I'm just saying with words. Read things with words, and that will help your SAT score and help your academic performance. Sitting down and reading a book over the summer, wow, how novel. Okay, reading young adult stuff, Hunger Games, whatever you find interests you, the mere act of reading and developing a reading habit, you will do better academically, and you will do better on any test you take as a result of honing that skill. And it's not something you just pick up and do. You got to work at it. Ken Burns documentaries are great. English grammar on Khan, math on Khan, vocabulary on free rice. There's all these things you can be doing. One thing I will say, don't do a stack of practice tests before you do proper prep, because you're just going to reinforce bad habits. James and I were talking about tennis. You just got to hit balls against the wall. You're going to get better. But the way you get appreciably better quicker is to have some pro tell you how to hold the racket a different way. And hope you don't blow out your shoulder like I did. But they're able to do that, and then you approach a test a better way. Doing a stack of practice test in the summer before 11th grade, you're wasting your time. You're better off reading back issues of National Geographic. So yeah, James, anything to add on that front?
Yeah, I think intellectual curiosity, right? And if you're applying for these elite schools, what things make you excited about the subject, right? You're not just doing the coursework, but you're maybe a student who's really interested in history, and it's always like, how have you taken that subject further? What do you do? You love the American Civil War, right? What have you watched? Have you read the Shelby Foote series? How have you brought that level of understanding to an extended essay? It's the extension of the learning. So it's going to help with not only an Ivy League application, but it's good for your brain, and it just shows it helps with your vocabulary, and it will help you overall in terms of your you're just going to be more knowledgeable in terms of your realm of vocabulary and ability to answer the critical reading section a little bit more thoroughly.
Yeah, and you're not going to sit down and read National Geographic all summer. Maybe just tell yourself, okay, every day 20 minutes, and you sit down every day at the same time for 20 minutes and just read something. I can't stress that enough. I do polls of my students in Singapore, how many of them read. There's only a couple of kids in the back who are scoring really high in reading and writing, say, yeah, I like to read novels. And okay, that's great. But unfortunately, they're not a dying breed, but an endangered species. And people that do well academically are good readers. It's just straight up. There's no way around that. And we have some reading programs over the summer. So anyway, onwards. How to prep later, take a mock test, see where you're at. The best mock tests are on the College Board website. Don't go to any test prep center and take a test there. Why? It's easy for them to make it look like you're scoring lower than you really are. If you can't figure out how to score these math tests, the mock tests, then you're probably not going to do well in university because it's not that hard. Then choose whichever test date works best for you, that you're not, too conflicted with other things. Work back 2 or 3 months, and then set up a plan to prepare yourself, or set up a plan to work with a good test prep company like Testing. Things to look out for: anything over 2-3 months is excessive. You should be doing other things with your time. You don't need that much work for the SAT. It's testing stuff you already know. It's an application of knowledge rather than new knowledge. Again, I talked a little bit about the free diagnostics, guaranteed improvements based on what? If you're using a bad diagnostic test, I could guarantee 600-point improvement, but it's not confirmed. You don't want a program that doesn't lead to a test date. And just because someone scores well in the SAT doesn't mean they're a good teacher. I've tried to hire lots of people who are terrible teachers, with great SAT scores. And then again, upselling dubious advising packages. We talked about this at the very beginning. A lot of people use SAT prep as a hook to get you in to spend $15,000 on university advising packages, which are bogus. And we really can't not recommend those enough. I'm sure it's a word for not recommending. But yeah, those packages are generally terrible and to be avoided in all cases. This is what I call the Craig curve. My last name's Craig. Your score goes up, and then your score goes down if you just keep doing prep again and again and again. So you want to hit that sweet spot and take the test, and then hopefully never worry about it ever again, and worry about your academics. Everyone has a potential SAT score in them. On my day, on a golf course, I can shoot 2 or 3 over par. It's probably not going to happen tomorrow, but I just have to accept that's the best I'm going to do. I'm not going to shoot a 68, and that's okay. And then other parts of me are better than Tiger Woods, right? So don't want to go there. Okay, anyway, other tests, broadly speaking, everything happened except in China. Is that sort of what your field, James?
Well, yes. So in that regard, this is, we know the situation there, that things are, in terms of COVID protocols and lockdowns, and it just, they have, not been able to, take these types of assessments. So they, the way that IB exams have happened is schools, they notify the IB. This is just in our context, right? We'll notify the IB if we're able to safely host the test. So in Thailand, in our situation, we said, yes, we are, because the numbers have gone down in terms of the overall COVID numbers. So we said we could safely, if students aren't COVID positive, then we could safely host the test. We had some circumstances where students did test positive, and they were able to take their IB exams outside at a hotel, actually, just sort of outside to test privately, right? So. But yeah, in regards to every country is different in terms of how they have to tell the IB if they can safely host the tests, and we decided to do that. So in China, that certainly wasn't an option with what was
and the schools are kind of making do with it. And we had crazy stories of people from China looking to fly in a private jet to Singapore to take exams. The university knows that you're in school in China and couldn't take an exam, and your school gives you a piece of paper that says you probably would have got whatever that score is. Universities are going to take that as word, particularly if you go to an established school. They don't want to make it hard. They just really don't want people breaking safety protocol to take a test. It's crazy. Okay. So here's our recommendations by year. Again, class of 23, you're up against it. You got to get your application soon, but work hard in school. That's the most important thing. Spend the summer stealing a march. If you know your first couple units in math next year, do those units ahead of time on Con. Do those units ahead of time in economics. Just use your summer wisely. Don't just fart about and see friends and play TikTok. 24, these are you're starting the IB or starting 11th grade, most important year. Again, test in October, December. And then maybe not again until the end of the year, because you want to avoid those early test dates in 23. Work on things that you're interested in. Find a passion that's a good passion, right? Reading, we've banged that drum enough. Class of 25, relax, take a deep breath, play sports, do something interesting. Find something that that really interests you that isn't what everyone else is doing. So many kids, particularly Singaporean kids, they apply to great schools and they're great students, and their activities are, Chinese orchestra, piano, and violin. Nothing against those pursuits. They're wonderful, but everyone does the same thing. So finding things that other people don't do, starting a group rather than just being in a group. Sports are great, pursue sports even if you stink. I learned more about myself losing by 30 points on the basketball court playing for varsity B than I did almost in any AP class that I took, sir. So there you go. Express your uniqueness. That sounds like a hang in there poster, but there you go. So that's my broad advice by you. Just anything to add there, James?
Yeah, I think what universities want to see, right, in terms of they want to know who you are and what you like and why you're interested in this and what drives you as a person, right? The uniqueness factor, but also maybe something charitable too, right? Like if you're somebody who is, you might have opportunities in your community to give back, right? Like working at a nursing home or, maybe helping up some of our students will go off and, in summers, help with rice farmers and help local communities in any way through educational endeavors. As long as it's authentic, that's the big word, right? Authentic community contributions go a long way. So there is something, take a look at your, what the needs are in your particular context, and maybe there's something you can do to make your environment a better place. It could be a recycling program, anything, right? That you can contribute in a positive way to your environment.
Yeah, and again, there's no shortage of programs that take rich kids and parachute them into Cambodia and help them build a wall for a week. But honestly, the people in Cambodia know how to build a new schoolhouse. You're not helping them you're getting in their way. If you go to Cambodia, it helps you work with their kids and help them with their schoolwork. That's something that you can do well as a 16-year-old. You don't know how to build a house. Okay, you use your own skills of English language, computer ability, things like that to help the kids there rather than building a schoolhouse. Of course, if you want to do that, just give them money. They don't know how to build it themselves. Anyway, that's a whole other rant that I haven't even gone on yet. Okay, onwards. What do we do? Test prep, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We work with kids, 11th, 12th grade. Some other programs in Singapore, some pre-math skills over the late summer for kids starting math courses in America. Reading and writing skills as well, reading and grammar skills. Numerous test prep programs going into the summer, into the end of the year in Singapore. And we're doing a program for NST kids in particular via Zoom. And those dates are there. If we get a lot of kids, one of us might fly out for that week. You never know, James. Be careful what you wish for. But we have that program there. Again, all this stuff is available from NIST on the website. See there at the bottom. And then again, as a conclusion, universities need students. Relax. Where you go doesn't impact your entire life. It's just a step in the journey. And doing well at a school is more important than going to a school and struggling. You want to do well, you want to be challenged, but you don't want to go to school that's not right for you, just as ranked higher. God, I hate rankings. Be adaptable, roll with the punches, just kind of get wu-wei with it, just kind of roll with it, and don't get too firm on your expectations. Because particularly for expectations for universities, well, your parents' expectations, your expectations, the world's different now. The world's different than it used to be for universities. You just have to find out what the best course forward is. And like we said 16 times, talk to your university counselor, talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your seniors in school who are at those schools. So if you know people who are a year or two ahead of you at a university that you're interested in, ping them on Instagram, wherever people talk nowadays, and ask them real questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the following? Don't just say, what's it like? That's a silly anodyne question that won't get you anywhere. Maybe say a scale of 1 to 10, rate the food, social life, weather, housing. That's the stuff that looks great on the websites, but it's not necessarily going to get to straight dope unless you talk to people who are at the school now. Okay, that's my big rousing conclusion. James, any final thoughts?
No, I think that's excellent advice, and the alums at your school, even if you don't know these students, your university counselor should be able to connect you with students that they've had at these schools to have candid conversations with them about whether they're happy at that, like that idea about being happy at the place, and not every Ivy League school is a happy place, because as international students, a lot of us are brought up just from the parent and the student, it is a bubble, and then we're thrown out to these some of these schools can be very competitive. So you want to find out from students who maybe have a similar context from you whether they're actually happy places and they find that they fit into that school. Big part of the process. So, but yeah, that's I think you summed up everything very succinctly. So that was great to thanks for inviting me today, and I was really happy to be part of this presentation.
Okay, and again, the presentation will be up in a day or two on my YouTube that I can link to the website. And certainly James will let the NIST people know about that. And any questions, nothing came up in the chat, so we either covered everything or people are dumbfounded, and that's fine. And we wish everyone a great summer, a great restful summer. We both have holidays coming up that we're very much looking forward to. And we hope everyone is happy in life and healthy. That's all we can really expect or hope for.
All right, take care, everybody. Bye.